Okay, so there are bits that we missed here and there in the tutorial, and they're all in the much talked about webpage. But I thought that towards we should conclude this with a consideration that is starting to occur, and I'm not sure whether you want to count this work as machine ethics. I do, and I think it should be. And this is social choice, the role that social choice plays in machine ethics. Now, when I said that moral theory is an explanation of what makes a choice good, in a certain sense, you can look at machine ethics as implementing moral theories, that we are implementing a reasoning system that basically tells a machine what to do in a particular situation. And that situation is not somehow different than a regular situation because it pertains to making a moral choice. Now, this reasoning system, it has to have values and obligations specified, so that because they play a role in deciding what to do, whether to decide what is a moral choice. Now, the problem here is whose values and obligations. Now, in machine ethics, we have this beautiful tradition that somehow happened because it was more or less pioneered. Well, it is done by computer scientists for sure. And we are skirting away from this part of the system. So if we're looking at the side, that's where my monitor is that you look at. So we are building this part, right? And then we are assuming that somehow values and obligations come on input. Now, a lot of these systems that are showcasing how different moral theories can be represented in them, we do that in order to show that, okay, we are trying to build a system that works once the values and obligations that you want to follow are provided by somebody else, right? So computer scientists tend to not want to be in the business of saying, these are the values a machine should follow, these are the obligations that a machine should follow. We solve everything else, and then once society somehow decides what are the values and obligations, what is a good robot or should do, or a good software agent, then those get piped in the system as an input, and you get a functional machine ethical system. But let me retrieve my. Oh, there we are. But I mean, at one point we have to face this problem of whose values, and this problem occurs in several places. In ethical egoism, you need to follow your own best interest. In utilitarianism, you need to find the greatest overall good, everyone considered. And here again, everyone considered both in act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. So then the question is, which values or obligations should be used? I mean, there's also the question of which reasoning moral theory should be used if you don't want to focus on values specifically, but perhaps you want to decide on a moral theory. And the thing is here in machine ethics is that humans can always follow their gut. So somehow moral theories in philosophy are not very rigorous when it comes to certain things. But machines cannot follow their gut. They have to be explicitly told, yeah, this is the value, this is the obligation. It cannot be, oh, these are agreed judgments. So in this is the hard case, this is the moral theory solves the hard case, but these are the, accepted judgments, agreed upon judgments, and the intuitive values, and you just go with that, and we're not talking about it in moral philosophy. In machine ethics, we have to do this. And so then the choice is, we have to figure out who makes the decision, otherwise some engineer will make the decision against their will. And this problem, the concern here is not that you're going to have some super villains programming your machines with their to extend their evil intentions, but rather than at certain times you make a programming decision that seems completely innocuous and completely has nothing to do with ethics, but in effect does help or promote a particular behavior, ethical behavior of the machine. So in addition to, it really shouldn't be the decision of the one person who happens to be tasked with encoding the machine. No, so it has been put forward that that this decision of whose values and obligations should be a collective choice. It should be the values and obligations of all of the stakeholders, and it should be some kind of social choice. Now, the idea that morality is a choice of a society is not strange to moral philosophy. There exists this thing called social contract theory, which is also known as contractarianism. And it says that morality arises from a social contract that self-interested and rational people would abide by in order to secure a degree of peace, prosperity, and safety. And this theory is due to Hobbes. And in social contract theory, they somehow worry a lot of whether it is enforceable because it is a contract. And then you need to have some very powerful person that can actually enforce the contract. In machine ethics, this is void because it's enforced because we have programmed the machine to follow a particular code. But social contract theory does not actually say how people should agree on what are these moral values that should be accepted. So how do we agree on machine morality, which values and which obligations? So this is done typically through social choice. Now, the problem specifically of social choice ethics in artificial intelligence is actually I spend a lot of time in computational social choice, and in computational social choice, we don't really talk about it. But there are two exceptions, and I mentioned them. The most important, I think, is the paper by Seth Baum, in which he discusses what are the things that we need to decide if we want to decide what morals and values, so what obligations and values should a robot or machine follow. There are these certain decisions we need to make before we can use social choice for the task of in machine ethics. And these three things are who has standing, namely who should have their values factor into the AI. He talks about an AI system. What procedure is used to obtain these values and obligations from those who have been determined to have standing, and how are the values of individuals combined to form the aggregated ethical views of society. Now, I will go through each of these questions to discuss what are the challenges there. So the problem of who has standing, it seems like obvious. Everybody who is impacted by the activities of a particular AI should have standing, should have a say in what morals should that AI be programmed with. However, once it comes to actually defining this, it becomes very tricky. So in elections, if you recall, the electorate is a very clearly defined group of people. So everybody who has a citizenship above the age of 19 or a particular different election, you have residency, what proves residency, and so on. So we need something like that when it comes to decision about AI. And since AI is not geographically located very precisely as people who vote in political elections, this becomes very tricky. So we may want to have all stakeholders, but then how do you identify them? How do you define what they are? Of course, you want manufacturers, users, owners, and society, but you need a precise definition, and you also need to take into consideration something that you don't have to take into consideration in social choice typically, is that some of these moral decisions of obligations are implemented in a system that just runs afterwards. So it could be that one generation votes on what morality should be implemented, and then all subsequent generations have to live with this. And what is okay today may not be okay tomorrow. So how do you account with this? You don't only need to define the electorate, but you also have to define how the electorate changes. When do you include certain when you award standing and when you retract it? The elicitation procedures. So this defines what information is sufficient in order to specify the obligations and values that you want machines to follow. In election, there is a ballot with options, and you are told what to do with it. And this is typically just like circle one option or rank them somehow. Now, how should we get input when it comes to moral values? Should we ask people to directly rank values? And this is problematic for at least two reasons. The first reason is that you may have very many values that you may need ranked, and people are not patient creatures with vast attention spans, and they just may not want to do that. And the second problem is the problem of framing. We're very much impressed by how options are being presented. So options that are being presented first are going to get more attention, are going to be considered more important, even though they're not necessarily are. So the framing problem here can play a significant role. So, or not only asking people to rank a lot of values, but also making sure that the ballot is, or the elicitation procedure is fair. There is an idea that maybe we should try to deduce the moral values by gamifying the election methods, and this is what Moral Machines project is actually doing. So you get the people to play a particular game. They're exploring, in fact, the option of doing this, among other things. And there are a couple of other projects that I'm aware of that don't have published results yet, where you have people make choices within a game environment, and then based on those choices, you extrapolate what actually their values are. And a third approach is to extrapolate the choices of values or obligations based on choices of values or obligations that are made in the past. So you make this process once, and then in the future, you build a prediction engine that predicts what a person would have chosen based on what they have chosen in the past. And this, as far as I understand, is what is being pursued in this paper called a voting-based system for ethical decision-making that was at AAAI in 2018. But as far as I believe, their archive version has more information, has additional material in it. And then, of course, once you have identified who has standing and you have defined your electorate and you have defined how to elicit information from this electorate in a reasonable way, then you also have to figure out how to aggregate this information that you have obtained. And social choice theory has one lesson to teach us, and that is that an ideal aggregation method does not exist. This is Kenneth Arrow, who is the first one in a way to mathematically rigorously prove this. So this basically means that there are aggregation methods that we are imperfect, that we have to choose which one is good enough for aggregating values and obligations. And so then the question presents itself as to what makes an aggregation procedure suitable for aggregating moral values or moral obligations. So the most popular method of aggregation, what everybody thinks of when they think of aggregation, is majoritarian choice, to follow the will of the majority. And so the question is, should the majority vote on what values a machine should or an agent should, or computational agent should be programmed with? Now, the problem with this is that even if you somehow pinpoint the electorate, and again, I say this is not nation defined or political defined or geographically defined. You may be dealing with an electorate that is all over the planet, because computational systems and devices are being produced in one country and they're being sold all over. There is another issue, that a majoritarianism only makes sense if you eventually have the possibility to be a part of a majority. So when it is very popular in election systems because there is elections every 4 years, and then in principle, at least, you have a chance to, if not this year, next year, be a part of a majority. Right? So following the will of the majority makes sense if it is for a while. But if you lock a decision in, so if it's a choice that's only made once, then if you follow the majority, you may end up in a situation. First, you may have a majority that is very narrow, a difference that is very narrow, so you have a lot of dissatisfied people in your society. And the second thing is that you may disenfranchise people. So you may build machines that seriously do not work for a particular type of people. So this is why typically in political elections, whenever there is a referendum or some kind of a game changer kind of a decision that impacts, that has a very long lasting impact, the decision-making, the aggregation method is not simple majority, but you use at least 2/3 or if not unanimity. But if not, I mean, this is just to discuss this, that it is not trivial as just take the majority and move on. What we need to do is specify what properties should a social choice aggregator satisfy for it to be adequate to aggregate values and obligations. Does it matter whether we are aggregating values or we are aggregating obligations? Does it matter whether the information, the specification of the information, how we specify what we elicit matter to the choice of the aggregator that we are going to use? All right, so that was my slides on the role of social choice in machine ethics. I'm going to stop recording.